Convention season is starting back up, and that means running or getting to play in games at conventions. Whether you're a player or a GM, you want to have a good experience when you're sitting down at a table full of strangers in a gaming hall. So how do you make a great convention game? Let's get into it. Convention games can be a really great experience, both for players and the game master. For GMs, it's a chance to showcase your favorite system or setting, introduce new players to the hobby, and maybe run something that you don't get to, your local group isn't as interested. Players also get a chance, maybe to play in something that nobody else at their normal table wants to play. They can try new games and see if it's for them before investing money, or just, have fun. Now, I've gotten to play in as well as run a number of convention games, so this is all of my kind of experience and things I have learned and wish to pass along to you. Learn from my mistakes, learn from my experiences. And this video is also going to be a lot more focused on kind of the GM side, but players, some of these tips are going to help you to find the right convention game for you. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later. Now, I think convention games provide an ideal opportunity to highlight a specific system or setting. And I think those games should utilize the strengths of that system or setting. One of the things that I love about conventions games is I can play in a system that's new to me and see if I like it, see if the mechanics make sense to me, see if the setting is something I enjoy. If I do, I'll probably go pop over to the exhibition hall and buy a rule book from the publisher. If I don't, I just wasted a couple of hours in the cost of the game ticket rather than, dropping a whole bunch of money on a game I'm never going to actually play. So with this in mind, GMs plan your game with the setting or system in mind. Or if you have a specific game or story you want to tell, pick a system that is an appropriate match. When we place tested Pathfinder 2nd edition at Gen Con years ago, the scenario that they built really highlighted all of the roleplay, exploration, and combat that Pathfinder could do. And it focused a lot on kind of, here are the new changes that were going into 2nd edition. I left the game feeling like I had a really good grasp of the overall mechanics and the kind of game that system would be great for. On the other hand, there was a game of Root that I played at a convention that didn't represent the actual setting or system, I think, and I'll get into why that is in a little bit. But that I left that game not knowing if I'd like the system or setting, as it didn't feel like an accurate representation. Didn't feel like the GM knew what they were talking about. Which brings me into my next point, which is professional GM. Now, GMs, I think you should know the material. I'm not expecting you to know every single rule in that setting, in that system, but you should know the relevant rules to the scenarios you're running. I hold GMs at conventions at a higher standard than I would somebody playing something, around their dining room table or even at like a local game store. Most conventions, I'm paying to play in the game, and the GM is getting paid, even if it's just that the cost of their ticket is covered. They're getting paid with that admission cost. So I'm going to expect them to be more professional because they're getting paid. They're professional. And I will add a note to any publishers out there. Give your GMs access to the modules and rule books in advance of the convention so they can prepare. If you need to, send them NDAs if it's a brand new system and not quite released yet. Remember that Root game? Part of what made it a bad experience was the GM wasn't given anything until they showed up at the convention. At least what they had told us, they got it like the night before and then were busy that night. So they really didn't have time to look at it. They kind of knew some of the basic rules, but they didn't even get through the entire packet they were given. And partway through our session, the GM realized there was an entire pre-made module they were supposed to be running that they just hadn't gotten to. So up until that point in the game, they were just making stuff up on the spot, which was pretty impressive, but also I think was the reason that myself and a couple other people at the table, because we chatted during a break, felt like this is not what I was expecting when I signed up for a game for Root. It felt like a little bit too cutesy and fun, cute animals, and less like we're animals, but it's still a little gritty. Which leads me into setting clear expectations. Having expectations set is really important for convention games, and this starts with the event catalog. The title and description of your game should convey what the game's going to be about. What is the core experience? Is it a learn to play? Is it going to be role play heavy? Is there puzzles, tactical combat? What system and setting are you playing in? What is the tone of this setting? Is it dark fantasy, horror, sci-fi, lighthearted, pulp, whatever it is? Is there a maturity level? Like, is it family friendly or adult? Setting all of this up is going to help players know what to expect and ensure that the game attracts the right audience. And players, this is something to look for in the descriptions. If it's super vague, be prepared to kind of have anything happen. But if you're wanting a specific experience, look for those detailed descriptions. And then hope that the GM actually delivers. Because I've also had a couple of games where I showed up and was like, this is not what I was pitched in the description. Additionally, provide information on what players need to bring or have prepped for the game. Do they need to have a character already made? Do they need to bring dice or writing implements? Most players are going to show up completely unprepared unless they're told otherwise. So it's essential to communicate expectations. When I've been a player, it's been a little frustrating to be told like, oh, you don't need anything, and then show up and be like, oh, well, you don't have the dice. Just download a dice roller. I've done that using the slow Wi-Fi at the convention, and that's been a little frustrating and been like, you now have to wait for me to download this and set this up before we can actually start the game. Whereas if it had said, hey, you're going to need dice, your own dice, I would have brought them with me. I would have thrown some in my convention bag, or made sure I went and bought my traditional dice purchase that I do at all conventions before that game rather than after the game. A big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Black Dragon Gaming. If you enjoy our content and want to help us make more cool things for you, head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. Now, once the game begins, I think it's helpful to reiterate the expectations set in the description. This ensures everyone's on the same page. It's also probably been a while since people signed up and they may have forgotten, or maybe signed up for a bunch of different games and are like, which game is this? I'd also keep the adventure focused, give clear objectives, and have plot-driven narrative. Don't be afraid to guide the game along a predetermined path. I enjoy open-ended sandbox games, but that's not really the best style for a convention game where time is limited. I know and I'm going to accept convention games are the perfect place for a railroaded game. Also, I think it's really great when each player and each character gets a moment to shine. Provide opportunities for the characters to contribute. This is great when it's part of the planning of your GM to be like, okay, there's something kind of for each of the characters. And I also think there's a little bit of like table management that GMs need to do. If you notice somebody being especially quiet, or especially if someone is consistently being talked over, ask that player directly what their character does. Since you're often playing with strangers at conventions, you kind of need to provide a little bit more of that table management to help make sure everyone is having a good time. You can't rely on the players kind of knowing each other as you would like in a home game. Now, timing is crucial when running a convention game. You have kind of a set window of time usually, and sometimes it can be quite tight. Stick to the time you are given and give yourself some wiggle. I think it's often good to, give a few minutes at the start to wait if anyone's running late. You may find that you have no-shows, and different conventions or groups may have different policies on how long to wait before starting with empty seats. I also would make sure that you end the game on time to make sure you're respecting everyone's schedules. People may have other things that they need to get to. They may be running a game or, on a panel or something right afterwards and have somewhere they have to go. I'd consider providing pre-made characters to expedite setup, unless character creation is kind of key to the gaming experience or your game, that particular game's experience. This is also helpful as you can make sure the game is built with those characters in mind, and you can provide the characters with, motivation and objective. Oftentimes when I've been in games or run games where the characters are pre-made, I'll have like a few extra so that people still can kind of pick and not get stuck with something they really aren't interested in. Now, once you've gotten into the actual game, don't be afraid to jump straight into the action and avoid filler. Provide a little bit of content and then jump right in. I also think it's great to be prepared with extra content in case the group progresses faster than expected. There are a lot of different reasons this can happen, and I've been in games that have ended way, way early and felt a little bit like the GM was unprepared and maybe I didn't get my money's worth. But also I've been in games that got cut off because they just had way too much. So if you're worried about that, I would also make sure maybe you've got some shortcuts prepared, like an NPC that can come along and provide a hint at a puzzle, or plan a reason to end combat after X many rounds or X amount of time. For those times when the dice are cursing the players and they just can't hit or do enough damage to actually end the combat. Running a good convention game requires careful planning, good communication, and to be adaptable. You can highlight the strengths of a chosen system or setting, set accurate expectations, maintain focus, and manage time effectively to create a great gaming experience for everybody involved. Also remember, the GM is not the only person at the table, so even if the GM sets themselves up for success, players also need to lean into the game for it to be good. Everyone contributes to the enjoyment of the game, and sometimes a game's a dud, and it's not really anything any one person did. So what do you think makes a great convention game? Let's chat about it in the comments below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Now we're rolling on sound. I filmed that whole thing with no sound.